Hello, I'm Soycat, and direct democracy is rare across Europe. Indeed, in my lifetime, my country has held just 3 nationwide referendums, 1 on the alternative vote, and 2 on the European Union, and I don't know how it went, but I'm sure I would have heard about this one if it was an important result. But what's interesting is France actually also held a referendum on the EU. This was their last referendum they held in 2005 because they asked if the people wanted to establish a constitution for Europe, and the people voted no. This was a big shock, and then the no vote was just later overridden by the French Parliament, who said, ooh, yeah, I didn't realize that when we asked the people, we'd have to respect their result if they said something different to what we were expecting. They were trying to use it as a political tool, and it kind of backfired, so they've now stopped using them. But this is not the case in Switzerland, where they hold multiple referendums every single year, including one held just this last week. In the last week, the Switzerland people, well, the Swiss, if you will, were asked if they should have an initiative for environmental responsibility, which, to put it in simple terms, was calling for an economy that does not violate the ecological limits of the planet. And in that referendum, about 70% of Swiss people actually voted on no. There is not a majority in any canton. The closest it got was Neuchâtel, that has about 42 to 58, but every single canton in Switzerland said that, yeah, actually, what we're going to do is we're not going to be having that, which is very concerning. Why did they do this? And also, is Switzerland okay? I think if you were to compare them to any other European country, you'd be pretty concerned that their largest party is the Swiss People's Populist right-wing party, and it's not like it's a brand new thing for them to be doing well. They've been the biggest party, not since 2019, not since 2015, not since 2011, not since 2007, or even 2003. You have to go back to the 90s before you get to a point where the populist right were not the leading party in Switzerland. So how is Switzerland doing okay? How is it that they have so many popular referendums and still manage to be what is one of the world's only 7 countries that are actually more, on a GDP per capita level, more wealthy per person than the United States, with indeed a wealth 4 times the global average? How does Switzerland manage that? Because unlike every country which has, I guess you could argue, tax evasion or oil, Switzerland has a very interesting system of how they run their government, and I want to talk about it today because I think it's one of the most interesting ones. And let's start with why the people rejected plans to improve the country's biodiversity, because 63% of people said no, we are not spending more money on wildlife, even though it's known for its pristine lakes and majestic mountains. The truth is that even though environmentalists sought to get some farmers to set aside their land and waterways to help create more green spaces, the truth is that this money was going to come from the public purse, and so the public decided, yeah, I don't think we should be spending money on that right now while we've got all of these other plans. Indeed, the federal government, who, weirdly enough, even though there is a federal government in Switzerland, they specifically came out against this. They said, we don't think this is a good idea, and yet they still let people vote on it. Weird how that works, huh? But interestingly, they said that they opposed the plan specifically because it was going to be too costly. They say 600 million Swiss francs, just call that 600 million US dollars if you don't know their conversion rate. It's close enough to 1-to-1 that it works. But yeah, it's spent on biodiversity protection each year, and so they worried that by spending more money that could be spent in the economy, the country would suffer. And indeed, the fact that you can make a call like that, the fact that you can have such an emotional pitch ahead of you saying, yeah, we are going to preserve Switzerland and make it a more environmentally responsible country, but you can actively say to yourselves, well, if I'm actually being honest, I think I would prioritize a functioning economy, is something that very few countries are able to do, and indeed is one of the reasons why you might say Switzerland manages to be quite well off. Obviously, that is just one point of evidence, but I do want to point out that Switzerland manages to have referendums all of the time, and with very few exceptions, they manage to be actually pretty reasonable about how they vote on them. So there's this really fun Wikipedia. In fact, if you look on any Swiss referendum, you can see that they've held referendums in every single year since World War II. I wonder what happened around then that stopped them doing some votes in 1943, but they've held referendums every single year, and I just had to look for a few of these years, and it is crazy to me what the Swiss allow the people to have a say on. In a normal, in most ordinary democracies, let's say, it is very, very standard to say, yeah, the people should not have a say on certain degrees of policy. Sure, we should be able to ask people about big nation-moving issues, like, for example, in France, they believed that we shouldn't let New Caledonia secede without asking for Metropolitan France permission, which they did give, although New Caledonia almost didn't give themselves permission to vote for self-determination. confusing. But the point is, like big constitutional issues, it might be important to ask the people directly rather than indirectly. But most countries would say, look, we elect people to the federal, we elect people to the federal council. We elect people to this big body where they vote on our behalf. Surely that's enough, right? Why would we have to vote directly on things like, and I'm not joking here, in 2020, I was expecting to see a COVID referendum in there, but no, they have some anti-discrimination legislation, some affordable housing legislation, and then in September, they had 5 votes, moderate immigration, federal law on hunting amendment, federal law on direct tax amendment, paternity leave, and procuring new fighter aircraft. That's right, the Swiss held a referendum on whether they should replace the fighter aircraft in the existing Swiss military fleet. And so yeah, the Social Democratic Party and the Green Party, indeed the Group for Switzerland Without an Army, were all coming together to say that they should not be buying new fighter aircraft. Also, Group for Switzerland Without an Army. That's a very fun advocacy group. But the idea was like, you know what, actually, we're pretty well defended. Let's have a referendum on where we should spend all of this money. And it's the exact same thing. If you are a believer in, the defense of Switzerland, no amount of money would be too much for it. You would say, this is so important. But if you're a believer in not that, then it's like, why are we spending so much money on this? In the same way that if you think the environment is important, but not more than $600 million important, you might say to yourself, that like, well, ultimately, I think that it's great, but I think that's about as much as I'd like to spend. Some number of people might say that, yeah, existing fighter jets, the I know there's a bunch of people on the internet who know all about the different breeds of fighter jets, so the F5s and the F-18As, these might be perfectly good in 2024, whereas some people would say, nah, an F-18A in 2022, let me tell you, you'd be blown out by the people who have the F-19Bs. Anyway, the important thing here is that if you look into, I'm sorry to my fighter jet followers, the F-35 and the F-18E/F, I was pretty close actually, might be very great choices, but Switzerland actually let people vote on this, and about 60% of people said, yeah. Actually, wait, whoa, okay, sorry, that's paternity leave. It went down to one of the narrowest votes ever, but they held a referendum and they agreed the people should decide. It is that even though the people in power who were going to be making these purchases felt they were so important, they were willing to let it go straight down to the people, which is absolutely nutty for a lot of people, I think. The idea of in 2021, let's look at these together, by the way, a ban on full facial coverings. Okay, that's spicy right there. 51% of people said that they should ban, covering one's face, which ultimately is a policy that, you can say for safety reasons, but it has a cultural issue to it, right? The fact that Switzerland can do these, and even their economic partnership with Indonesia, oh, that is very, very interesting, huh? But yeah, the idea that they are willing to put everything up to a vote if people want them to do so is actually not a weakness of Switzerland, but kind of a strength. I think about this a lot. Like, when I first heard about Switzerland's direct democracy, I thought to myself, oh, that's really cool. I think that there are lots of decisions that are made, say, here in the UK, that you don't really get a say on because, with just a few major parties, if none of those parties match your beliefs, let's say, for example, you are a extreme... you believe very strongly in center-left beliefs, a stronger welfare state, but you also want to leave the European Union, before we did a vote on that one, where I have learned from people overseas that we did in fact leave. I forgive my sarcasm, but if you believe both those beliefs, it's like, okay, I can either vote for one or the other. I don't get to have both. Whereas if, for example, in Switzerland, you think that we should have a ban on full facial coverings and an economic partnership with Indonesia, you can have both if you want to. There's no, you don't have to vote for the party that likes both or the party that likes neither. In theory, it is a better system, but a lot of people would say it starts to get to a point where your democracy becomes incompatible with itself. The most famous example of this, I actually forget what year it is. We can find it very quickly, I'm sure. It caused a very big crisis in Switzerland because Switzerland actually had a referendum which went against the European trade deals that they'd actually signed. Was it 2022? Let's make the guess that it is 2022. Should young children and adults be protected from tobacco advertising? Apparently they should, by the way. But like, if they vote for something which is then incompatible with another part of their democracy, this is the flaw in direct democracy. Indeed, the idea of, France doesn't want to establish a constitution for Europe, but they want to remain inside of Europe in its existing form, where signing the constitution is necessary. That's not a very good way to describe it, by the way. But let's say that that is true, just for the sake of making this work. But if they want to have this, then, like, what should the French government do? Should they listen to the people directly, or should they listen to the majority who say, yeah, being in the EU is right, and I just... you get the point that if you have a direct democracy without all... and then you have an indirect democracy, and they kind of work against each other, you end up with a bit of a problem, one which became a huge crisis in the UK, where there was just a huge debate about, like, okay, should we respect the referendum? Should we say that, 51% of people, they voted and we said we would listen? Should we then say we shouldn't listen? And I think that that really kind of soured my opinion on the whole idea for a while of, like, there is no point in a referendum if you're just asking people to confirm what you already believe. And I think that the more I've thought about it since then, having this be the last referendum in the UK, probably the last one for some time, I think the Switzerland formula kind of works in the same way that you might argue if you're a believer in the US system. A lot of Americans really love the idea of, like, oh, it's checks and balances, and I like the phrase checks and balances, and the way in America it works is like, oh yeah, so there is one document which 3 separate bodies have to, like, follow and then add, and basically there's, like, 3 separate bodies that deal with laws, right? Legislative, executive, and judicial, and each of those have an element of democracy to them. The judicial is basically the collection of your last, call it 5 or 6 presidential elections. This is a presidential election directly, and this is an election done by the state-by-state issue. So it's like you have 3 branches of government that all sort of have their own different say on what laws are passed and how, etc., right? And so the people like this system. Every country has a version of it, but instead of having to say, okay, we have 3 forms of democracy, all a bit convoluted, what if we instead said, okay, so let's do classic Toycat MS Paint. Can't you have a check on democracy that is another form of democracy? Imagine you got 3 black boxes here, right? And in Switzerland, they do. So you have one box, which is people directly saying what they want. How do you avoid, contradictions in what people want? Well, you get people to ask, what do you want directly? This box here is referendums. I don't have the space, but it works. It's fine. We'll minimize. Actually, we'll just put it on 2 separate lines. So this is the referendum box here, right? Hey, it perfectly fits. And this is your direct elections. So this is parliamentary democracy. So I'll just put parlier. That's close enough. You get the point. Okay, wait, meant. There we go. Parliament. And then... no, I want... Okay, so and then you have a parliament, right? And then you could also have the executive, the person who's in charge, except in Switzerland, they actually have a council, which kind of just messes with my whole point here. But you get the idea that if you have 3 separate systems where people are voting on, the people vote directly on this, they vote indirectly on this, and they vote really indirectly on the people who actually have to do the thing. Now, if you have the people who actually have to do the thing have to balance the opinions of these last 2 boxes, their direct democracy and their indirect democracy, and their own belief for what is good for Switzerland, you get a system which is what they have right there. If you've ever looked into the Swiss Federal Council, they're really goofy. They don't. So the idea in Switzerland is one leader is too much concentration of power in one person. They have 7 people, no more than 2 of which are from the same party, and those people have to come together and collectively make decisions. The point is that they are meant to be as close to everyman as possible, and this is just such a crazy idea to anyone who lives in a country where you expect to have one person, and that one person makes the final decision. But it also ensures that no one can make decisions unless they earnestly believe and convince other people with differing views that that is the best call. And if you balance that, if you balance this very informal system of parties with the actual democracy that needs to be followed, with the referendums that the people can have, where they can say, you know what, no, you messed up, you made the wrong call, you might have signed us up to some treaty with the EU, but I don't want foreigners in my Switzerland, so make those 2 things work together. If you can have that balance, and if I think ultimately it can work as a country, and I just wanted to show you that, interestingly, Switzerland has been populist-led for now coming close to 30 years, but despite that, their country is held together and not just doing okay, but like doing substantially better than okay. Despite the huge challenges, geographically, it is a bunch of mountains, right? They have 4 separate languages and people groups, German, getting the Germans and the French people, which I know they're languages, not people, but getting these people to share a country and having that country actually function, having a federal, and by the way, I should also mention, like, the fact that it's federal, so it's like, yeah, this is actually just level 1. You also then have level 2, where it's like the individual cantons can then choose to have their own referendums. They can choose to have their own parliaments. And it just endlessly goes down to, if you actually ask people and you work out the proportion you should listen to their response, and you make it so that if they aren't heard, they can keep asking until they are, you weirdly enough get a system that works. And I think Switzerland is proof that some ideas are so bad but still work entirely in practice. And I hope that this video was a useful dive into it, because that's what I wanted to do today. It's basically news though, right? I hope you found this interesting, and tomorrow we'll be back with something else around the world. But yeah, I think if you ever want to do something fun, just look into referendums in Switzerland. You can do it all day, and I swear, like, if I picked my birth year, right? Let's just go to 1995, and let's see what Switzerland voted on then. They had a resolution on dairy farming, and 36% of people did not like that. Also, they had a federal resolution on popular initiatives. They had a referendum on referendums. How does that... And then they voted against... Yeah, they didn't vote largely in favor of it. I don't understand what that means. Anyway, so yeah, the interesting thing here is, yeah, as you can see, Switzerland can make an illogical series of democracies work together in one very functional democracy, and so why can't your country? I would actually say, you know, if I... since I'm here anyway, we've hit the 16-minute mark. This video is too long. But let's just say, I think that if you actually are being critical about it, rather than just saying Switzerland is good because of these things, you'd have to say Switzerland is successful. You could say despite or because of these things, but they are successful with these things, proving some point. But the wider point is probably that if you have one strong leader, let's say the China system, right? You can get some serious stuff done. You still are always going to, regardless of how your system is set up, unless you have absolute dictatorship, like very few countries still do. But like, you still need to get along with the local people, but there's a clear hierarchy of, I am the person who does the things. You do what I say to whatever degree, you know, you want to, but you are doing what I say, right? Whereas the opposite system is Switzerland, where it's like, yeah, there's no one person who can get anything done in Switzerland. You need the people who are going to be doing the thing to agree with that. And you basically have differing variations of this. The US has experimented with the idea of basically a similar system closer to Switzerland, and now they're moving closer and closer to a European country-style democracy. It's funny, given their critiques of Europe recently, but they're trying to have this European system where it's like, there is one ruler of all the land. State-by-state rules? No, 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 no. There is one God Emperor, and he makes all the decisions. Other branches of government? I don't know. That sounds like people who are subverting the will of the people. You know, the US system, inadvertently or not, is moving closer towards a European system, where instead of being divided and then having state system, it is going towards one, and that ultimately does strengthen their ability to do things. Are those things good or bad? Should the federal government do more or fewer things? Kind of depends on your opinion. But in Switzerland, it works. Maybe it works because they don't... You know, like, ultimately, like, if Switzerland had voted against fighter jets, would they be invaded by now? Probably not. If Switzerland votes for fighter jets, are they fine? Yes. If Switzerland votes in favor of the environment, that's good. If they vote against it, they're fine. You could argue they're set up in such a strong position that they don't need to do that. But how? Because the people are actually, you know, willing to see the future of their country in a more than a 4-year basis, which maybe is an important thing. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you'll enjoy this video, because I'll see you in the next one. Maybe. Hopefully. Goodbye.